Our journal is beginning to fill out nicely now. I've taken some of the cards that I did the stamping on when I made the little tags, and I had some of that left over, and I've added it with a bit of washi tape to these panels. That will make a nice little place you can write on the front, or you can write on the reverse, or if you write on the reverse you can keep it completely private. And we have our beautiful little embellished items from before as well. But a journal has to be a practical thing. It has to be functional for you to write in. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to show you a couple of ways that you can design your own journaling cards. Here are a couple of examples. Let me start with these ones. These have some stamping and some colouring in, and I'm going to show you how you can make your own cards like these. I call them journaling cards. I don't know if that's what anybody else would call them, but that's what it makes sense as to me. And there are these ones here, and I'll take you through the detail of how to make these. But before I do that, I want to give you an idea of how and why I've made these for this particular journal. You'll see that these have got no texture on them. Everything comes from the stamping and the colouring. So the back is completely plain, and the front, although there's a design on there, that's actually designed so that you can write on this. Many years ago I used to teach scrapbooking classes for beginners, and we would start on the smallest of the squares that was standard paper at that time for scrapbooking, which was 8 inches square. And we used to divide that space up. We would maybe divide it in half, or we would use different colour panels to divide it into thirds or into quarters. But what we were trying to do was break down the intimidating open space that people felt they had to fill, and felt pressure from having to fill that. So what I learned from that is that when you're faced with a blank sheet and you want to fill it, that blank sheet in its own can stop your creativity. So all of these things are designed to promote creativity and take away that fear of feeling that you have to do a left to right, all the way from top to bottom exercise filling a piece of paper. What we can do is break it up. So maybe you only want to say a couple of things here. Maybe you just want to put a little line of text there. Maybe you've got a really nice quote and you just want to put the quote central. Because this is a broken up space, I think it makes it much easier for you to do that. And certainly in the classes that's what we found. Once people had gained confidence with the smaller size, when we went up to the full 12 by 12 inch massive big squares for the full scrapbooking, people were much more comfortable with it because they'd broken the white space dilemma, or they'd broken, it wasn't always white obviously, but they'd broken that big space dilemma. And I think these make it easier for you. There's another couple of practical reasons why these don't have texture or sewing or buttons or anything on them, and it's because I want them to be able to be glued into position or held with washi tape on one of our panelled pages. So this is our map, and you could of course write on, always sounds like fairies, doesn't it? It's a little message on my phone. You could write directly onto your map, but I think it's rather nice, and I think I would rather have a couple of these with writing on them. And then if I want to keep this as an image and not write on it, I can do that too, because I could put some washi tape down the side or across the top, and I could just open it out and I could write on the inside. The other thing with any junk journal is that sometimes it can be difficult to get a flat space, because if you've done things on the back, if you've sewn a pocket on the back, you won't always find that that is a flat space. Now I will show you a way to get around that a little bit, maybe in one of our future videos, but a way to get around that in the short term is to make a little card, and you write on your card and then you glue it or stick it into position in your journal whenever you want, whenever you're ready. And because these are flat, these can be stored. So do you remember many of the tuck spots that we had at the very beginning? These will fit in here. And then whenever you're ready to write something in your book, you can come and get one of your journal cards and you can write it, and then you can stick it wherever you want to in your book. And the same with these, but these have got a little bit more going on to them as well because these contain prompts. So I've explained to you how these can be used and why I think these are a useful addition. So now I'll show you how to make them. To make these journaling cards, you start with your colour palette. So the themes for my colour palette are a sort of brown here and blues here and a very soft hint of green here. I've got some pencils from my stash just to see how they work. So my smoke blue is this pencil. I'm just going to make a note that that is number 9201146. If there's a reference on your pencil, it is a really good idea to write it down, because otherwise if you put your pencils back in a drawer or back in a pencil box, then you'll never remember which one it is and you have to go through all of this again. So just make sure, to make your life easier, you write down any reference. Now this should be easy. This is a Desert Camel. This is actually a watercolour pencil, but oh, it's lovely. But it does the job, so it doesn't matter. I don't need to use water. Desert Camel, yeah. So now I know what my 3 pencils are that I need to create these cards. The thing that ties these together aren't the stamps. The stamps are different, and they're from different sets. What ties these together and makes them look like they're from a kit or something that you might have bought is the colours. It's the colours that add cohesion to the work. And I'm going to show you how to make these, and it's so simple. You'll be thinking, oh wow, that's just, I can do that. So we start with a square of card, plain white card, and I'm going to get a piece of waste paper. That's my little scrap of paper here. And the first thing I'm going to start with is, which one shall I do? I'll do this one, I think. I'm using my potting soil. This is one of the inks from my ever trusty colour palette. I'm going to ink that up and I'm going to press it down a couple of times. I think this time I want it to go a little bit round the corner, a little bit round that corner, and I'm going to have a little bit popping up from the bottom there, and I'll do the same at the top. So don't get too caught up on being precise about this, because the flowers, the stamps sort of disappear into the rest of the card. To make those stand out a little bit, I'm going to take my pale brown pencil and I'm just going to colour in. See, I told you it was easy. I'm just going to colour in where the stamp is, where that image is. Let me turn this over so you can see it a bit easier. This is my my template. And don't worry if you get edges that look a bit definite and don't look as smoothly blended in, because we deal with that later. And then do the same down here. I have a brown pen. This is a dark sepia pen, and I'm using this to go around the outside edge, and I'm adding 2 lines, and I'm just going straight over where the image is, and I'm making my lines cross over just because I think that makes it a bit more interesting. So nothing we've done so far is difficult. You can do all of these things. I know you can. And the purpose of this is to show you how easy it is. No drawing skills required. So that's the beginning of our little image. The reason that I said don't worry about if you have hard edges is because you can go around with an eraser and just soften those edges. So then it looks, you know when you buy kits and all the hard lines are just beautifully gone, they just dissolve into the rest of the artwork. I love that, and this is the best way I've found of achieving that effect for myself. I'm going to add a little bit more colour to my flowers, so I'm going to just take my blue pencil and colour in, I say colour in, I'm just going to add some blue over where the little flower buds are. I'll do the same on this side. I won't make you watch me do the whole card. I'll just do this little top section so you get the idea. And again, if I've got any hard lines in there that I don't like, and I have a couple, I just go in with my eraser and soften them a little bit. And that way I have a hint of colour without it being a really sharply defined colour. And when the whole card is complete, you won't notice this. You won't even look at this to see where the hard edges are or is it soft enough. You'll just accept it for a lovely little card. And I'm using my green pencil just to colour in the leaves. None of this colouring in is very sophisticated or very clever, and very often I do go outside the lines, but that's fine. It doesn't matter. Okay, I'll do the bottom. The effect that you want is a sort of a hint of a tint. You don't want it to be strong, bold, very obvious colour. I'm using a lettering stamp that I use a lot. This is from Impression Obsession, and it's just called L9724 if you want to go and look for that. I don't have any other large lettering stamps. I find that this meets all of my requirements. I'm using a stamp, I'm using an ink pad called Laurel Leaf, and this is one of the ink pads from my palette. I'm using this one because it's soft. It's a nice soft colour that won't dominate my little card, because I want to be able to write over the top of it, and I don't want this lettering to be so obvious that it would interfere with anything that I want to add. You'll notice I'm not covering the whole of the lettering stamp. I'm just doing patches because I don't actually want to cover all of this in lettering. So once that's inked up, I'm going to place my, try and place it straight, place my card on the top. And when I take it away, can you see how faint that is? I mean, that should not stop you writing on that card. The last thing I'm going to do to complete my card is I'm going to go around the outside edge with my ink pad, which is called Bisque. It's one of the ones from here, and I'm just going to drag it around the outside. You could use a darker colour if you want to make it look a bit more vintagey, but I decided I would stay with the softness of the card, and that's why I went for one of my softer shades rather than, say, the potting soil, which would be very dark. That just gives it a nice finish. So that can be added to the rest of our, oops, I've got rubber stampy stuff on them. So that can be added to the rest of our card collection, and now we've got a few of those. These cards are slightly different, but only slightly. The paper is actually some coffee, I always say coffee, it's tea-stained paper. So this is from my stash, and what I did on my computer was I wrote out a range of prompts for what I might want to include in my journal when it's finished. So I took things like, and I just put them all into a block of text, and once I had a few I copied and pasted 3 times down my sheet. So for example, things that you can't live without, favourite recipes, best moments, write as many positives about today as you can think of, list places you want to visit, and there's a whole range of different prompts on there, because I quite like a journal that helps you. Sometimes you will know exactly what you want to journal for. It'll be for something very, very specific, and then it's really, really obvious. Other times you want the pleasure of making a journal without a specific end in mind. You just want to use it whenever you feel the need to write down some thoughts or spend a bit of time on your own just thinking about things and then logging them. So I like to have a little prompt, but rather than simply a list of things to go through, I thought this would be a more subtle way of doing it. And what I've done is I've ripped the bottom of the paper off to get a little piece like this. Now obviously this won't then have everything on it, but that's okay. So I can make out the last plastic thing which you cooked with, or which you are likely to swap out for glass. So although it's not the whole phrase, it's enough. I will remember, that will prompt me to remember what I wrote on my sheet, and I'll think, oh yeah, okay, I'll write about that. And because each of these cards has a different part of this larger sheet stuck on it, each card will give me a slightly different prompt. So I have my little piece ready, and I'm going to show you how to make these cards. I'm going to go, I'll pop that in there, I'm going to go back to my my scrap paper, which is actually my template sheet, so it's not really scrap paper, and I need to get a blank piece of card. These cards are all 5.5 by 4 inches in size. To begin this, I take my lettering stamp again, I ink it up very, very lightly in patches, and I press the card into it, as we did before. A way to do this a bit easier if you want to save your fingers is to use one of your stamp blocks. These have multiple uses, not just for stamping down images. Then we have a nice soft text. So again, this text is not going to dominate the finished card, but it does give you a lovely background. But we want that background to be a little bit less white, and this is how we do it. I've got my bisque, which is one of my lightest inks from my palette, and I'm going to go over the whole card in circles with my ink pad straight onto my background. Because these are small enough to hold, you don't need a piece of foam, you can just go straight in with the ink, and it will soften the colour from white to a very gentle sort of creamy kind of colour, I suppose. And you can do that as much or as little as you want. This one has quite a lot on the background. This has less. The darker colour here is what we'll do next, because that comes from my darkest brown that I have from my palette, which is the Potting Soil ink. And I'm going to go around the outside edge. I'm going to drag my ink pad, and this is what we want. These drags are what we want. It might take a bit of practice before you get to just get to be familiar with what angle you need to hold the pad at compared to your paper or your card, but it's fun experimentation. And the other thing that I like about this is whatever you come out with, it's not going to be wrong, as long as you still have some space where you can write on your card. The result will be good. I'm going to take my little piece of paper, and I don't want to cut this, I don't want this to have a hard edge. So I'm just going to rip the edge away using my ruler to tear against. And I've got a little bit of glue, and I can stick my glue on the back of my paper and then stick my paper on my card. Now if you're very good and well behaved, you will let this dry. I'm just going to make sure there's no ink on that edge, so there's no glue popping out of that edge, because to complete it I'm going to go back in with my ink pad and just cover that over. And that's how those cards look when they're finished. I hope these ideas in today's video have given you some thoughts for what you might like to do for your own journal, and maybe given you a steer for how you might like to write in the journal and how you might like to decorate your own journaling cards. So until we meet again, take care.